Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, dear ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Tech Exchange of Burckhardt Compression. We're happy that you take your valuable time to join our 30 minutes webinar today. My name is Marion Odermatt and I'm excited to guide you through this presentation. Just a few information before we start. This webinar is live and will be recorded, so all your microphones are muted. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A button in the navigation bar, either on the bottom of your screen or on the top. We will answer your questions at the end of the session. In our Tech Exchange webinar, we give you technology insight of reciprocating compressors. So today we look into the topic how to plan a safe and successful turnaround. And these are our 3 key takeaways. Understand why the preparation is so important. A good preparation is half the battle. How you can identify the right scope and be prepared for the unexpected. And last but not least, we would like to share some practical examples and how we cope with challenges. So our speakers today are Mohammad Sajid, representing Burckhardt Compression Service Division in the Middle East region. With over 12 years of experiences in the compressor field, he has been involved in several turnarounds in this region. And our second speaker is Raimund Arzmann, Senior Compressor Specialist, Major Event Management, has more than 30 years of experiences in the compressor business and was also involved in many turnarounds around the world. With this, I will hand over to Mohammad.
Thank you, Marion. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen from my side. In today's webinar, myself along with our Senior Compressor Specialist, Raimund Arzmann, we are going to talk about how to plan a safe and successful turnaround. For that, let's begin with the overview of different stages in a turnaround maintenance. We identify 5 stages in the complete cycle of turnaround. The first is identification. Next is the scope and estimation. Then comes planning and scheduling. These 3 stages are considered the preparation phase of a turnaround. Next is the execution. Last but not the least is the closing. We also cover lessons learned, future recommendations in the closing stage. Since our theme for today's webinar is planning a safe and successful turnaround, we are going to focus only on the preparation phase. If you are interested to know about the execution and the closing stage, feel free to provide your comments in the feedback form that you shall receive shortly after the webinar. Alternatively, you can also contact Burckhardt Compression representative for more information on the same. Now let's start with the preparation phase. A well laid out preparation phase is a key for good execution. More than half of the turnaround project is considered complete. Going into the details of each stages, let's start with the first stage, identification. The main stakeholder in this stage is you, our customers. Planning team, reliability team, and the maintenance team are mainly responsible to break the company's corporate vision into several strategies. These strategies may include topics related to safety, reliability and availability of assets, identification of bad actors, carbon emissions, and so on. It could also include revamps, upgrades, capacity increase, and new technologies. These activities are communicated with other stakeholders such as OEM representatives, licensors, and key vendors. Then begins the ground activities for the identification stage. All activities hereafter forms the base for the next stage, which is the scope and estimation. During this identification stage, active interactions between customer and contractor takes place. Many preliminary topics are discussed. we start with defining the battery limit concerning the turnaround. This involves which plant to be considered for the upcoming turnaround. We also identify assets such as compressors, motors, heat exchangers, lubrication system, and other auxiliaries. Other topics that we consider during this stage is: when was the last turnaround? What were the outcomes from that project? How is the plant performance? Did any asset or component cause trip in the past? And should we give any particular attention to any component of the compressor? Any upgrades to be considered? When was the last maintenance intervention? And what was the recommendation in the report? As a best practice, these preliminary informations are taken into consideration, and we recommend performing the site survey. Site survey is a key activity in the preparation phase. Site survey is sometimes called differently in many companies. Some call it consultative study, some call it health checkup, and so on. The deliverables may vary depending on the expectations and the purpose to carry out such activity. Here it's worthwhile to mention that Burckhardt Compression can also carry out CSIS, which stands for Compressor Survey and Integrity Study. CSIS is a more advanced version of a site survey. For a common understanding, let's call it site survey. The site survey is typically a 2 to 3 days job where our specialists visit the concerned site and undertake activities such as measuring vibrations on compressor and auxiliary equipment, measuring temperatures at critical locations, checking for visible degradations, checking for leakages such as oil, water, gas, and so on, foundation checks, and last but not the least, we conduct interviews with operators and maintenance personnel working close to the equipment on a daily basis. Site survey could also give a good indication on how long the machines can be operated safely prior shutting it down for the turnaround. Once the data is collected on site, back office activities take place. This involves operating parameter evaluation, review of history, current trends, historical trends versus the design data. As an outcome for the site survey, a professional report is prepared. This consists of as found conditions of the machine, assessment of the data collection, recommendations, spare parts requirements for the turnaround, suggestions for improvements, and identified bad actors, if any. The submission of this report concludes the first stage, that's the identification stage. With this, I hand over to my colleague Raimund to take over the next stages of the preparation phase. Raimund, over to you.
Thank you, Sajid. Then let's speak about the scope of the turnaround. The identification phase is over. So what will be the scope? We know now what the focus needs to be on the equipment concerned, but it must be defined more clearly at this stage. What will be the work scope and the scope of material? A critical question at that stage, especially for Burckhardt Compression, will it be a turnkey project? Turnkey project will be a lot more work for Burckhardt Compression because a lot more of planning, organizing, scheduling will be required. And at the same time, this way, it will take away a lot of the burden of planning and responsibilities from the customer side. Therefore, it's certainly recommended to follow such an approach because it makes the project much easier for the customer, and Burckhardt Compression has gained a lot of experience in doing that over the last 2 decades by doing many turnarounds. We also have to consider what subcontractors will be involved in the turnaround, and what is included and excluded of the scope for each party involved. We will have to think about already at this stage what kind of manpower we are going to need. Will it be site management by Burckhardt Compression? Usually, of course, we need our OEM specialists, technicians, subcontractor, people. All this needs to be considered here. And tools, spare parts, and consumables are another consideration. An important remark here is to plan all this in a very early stage, well ahead of time. This will avoid stress when the turnaround comes closer, avoiding the need of last-minute preparation. Also important here, what will be the time frame available? The time frame is usually given by the overall plant consideration, not necessarily only the compressor section that we will deal with. And given the time frame available, the work scope can be roughly framed already. Very important is to clearly define interfaces to avoid misunderstandings. Few examples: who is doing the equipment, the initial equipment cleaning? Who is going to take care of high pressure piping in case of an LDPE plant? Who is taking care of the logistics when you uncouple a motor from a compressor? We once had an example here that a support that is needed was not considered, and then it was becoming a rather stressful event to produce drawings, to organize material, to do a lot of welding. So this can be avoided by clearly defining the interfaces ahead of time, that each party knows exactly what it is supposed to do and what not. Then will there external machining be considered? We will have to find out if suitable machine shops will be available to do outside machining. Next slide, please. Right, here you see an example. We will have to find out if the machine tools that will be available can carry the parts that are going to be machined, and to make sure that the accuracy will be there. And on-site solutions, as far as machining and repair work is concerned, would we also consider in situ machining, means doing major repair work on a compressor crane case, for instance, instead of taking it out from the plant, removing it from the foundation, we could consider machining it on site. There are specialized companies to do that. If a plant has become rather old, then foundations are in many cases a consideration. Foundation repairs should be considered. And the question again will be, must the unit be removed, or can the foundation even be repaired in installed condition? We will have to think about best practices for replacing parts. Like you can see here on a little picture, replacing a lower frame of a hypercompressor. An efficient method we developed to save time So all this comes into consideration when we define scope of work. So we have now a clear idea what the scope will be, how the scope, the overall scope will be distributed, so we can go after the planning phase. And this is really about sweating the details, because it's the details that matter. You must not forget anything at best. Experience shows that you always forget little things, but the less you forget, the better off you will be at the end. We will have to identify time-critical activities to know which will be a critical path, so we can define milestones and we can allocate resources accordingly. We will also have to identify risks and produce a mitigation plan accordingly. So what we do here, we typically have a work list of all the activities that need to be tackled. From this, we are going to produce a planning schedule. From this, we can find out, or we will find out together with the overall time available, what approach we will have to follow. Is shift work going to be required? How many hours per day can be worked? How many days per week? What off days will have to be considered due to local holidays and such? Very important, what kind of parallel work can be performed to save time, to make best use of the time frame available. We'll have to form working teams. We will have to consider local cultural issues, weather, of course, hot weather, cold weather, or storms even to be anticipated. And in the last 2 years, the COVID was a big factor because we had to consider quarantine time. And for everything, somehow, we should also have a backup plan. Then logistics and infrastructure. Where is the people gonna stay overnight? What will be hotel accommodations? What will be the commute to the site? What will be the on-site infrastructure? And on-site transport can, for instance, from a laydown area, can one easily reach the compressor site? Or is the distance too far and are we even going to need vehicles to do that? So all this plays a role in this phase, in this planning aspect. And then it's a lot about manpower, because manpower is the most important resource we are going to have. And the well-being of the personnel is important because then they will perform as expected. We need to find out what manpower qualifications are needed, specialists, supporters, and very important, what will be the availability of the specialists? Because we are living in very busy times. The economy in our field is booming. And as you know, everywhere specialists are becoming a rather rare resource. So we will have to form teams. Everybody has to know his responsibilities. We will have to consider language issues. Most of the specialists, of course, speak English, if you look at it on an international perspective, but in many countries, there is still a lot of people that do not speak English, and local language skills could become very important. So this was, in a nutshell, just a few remarks about turnaround scope and detailed planning. With this, I hand back to Sajid for the continuation of this presentation.
Thank you, Raymond. To sum up, preparation phase is the key and leads to smooth and successful execution of the turnaround. As part of the best practice, we suggest to perform the site survey, wherein the actual behavior of the machine is identified prior defining the scope. Surprises cannot be eliminated completely. However, certain contingencies and backup plans are part of preparation phase, especially for the critical activities. This helps in better managing surprises. Stakeholders work as team, defining roles and responsibilities for each individual. Lastly, I would like to conclude by saying, for a successful turnaround, there's no I or me. The key word is we. With this, I thank you all for the participation and attending the Tech Exchange webinar. Marion, over to you.
This actually brings me up to announce our next Tech Exchange, which will happen in September. The focus of that session will be about remote support services. So further information about key takeaways and also the speakers will be shared in a later stage. For this reason, please make sure you have registered the Tech Exchange. This means if you have not received the webinar invitation directly, or those who joined the webinar through the LinkedIn event, please make sure you will complete the registration on the website. In this way, you will not miss any future Tech Exchange and will be informed automatically about further Tech Exchange webinars. In order to continuously improve our webinars, we kindly ask you to provide us your feedback by answering the survey, which will be sent to you in the next days. We very much look forward to hear from you and learn also if there are any upcoming and interesting topics for Tech Exchanges in the future. Furthermore, we are keen to know if you're interested in a follow-up session of this execution and lessons learned or closing session. We are already at the end of the presentation, so great to have you had with us in this webinar. Hope you enjoyed the session and learned something for your next turnaround. Thanks for listening and for your participation. The recording will be provided on the Burckhardt Compression TechXchange website and published on social media. Feel free to share with your colleagues who may not have had the chance to join the live session today. With this, we say goodbye and hope to see you again.